Hello and welcome to Mystic Bedtime Stories. I'm here with you on this quiet evening, ready to share a story that has been waiting centuries to be properly told. If you're joining us for the first time, you've found a sanctuary for the profound mysteries of human history. We explore the civilizations that thrived in silence, the achievements of peoples whose names history has nearly erased, told with the reverence they deserve in the peaceful quiet of evening. Tonight's story challenges everything we think we know about the ancient Americas. It's about a people who built pyramids that rival those of Egypt, who created astronomical calendars as precise as any in the ancient world, and who established what may have been the largest city north of Mexico, all centuries before Columbus ever set sail. Picture the vast expanse of the American Midwest as it was 1,000 years ago. The mighty Mississippi River flowing with patient power, but along its banks, where now we see endless fields of corn, there once stood monuments that would have taken your breath away. Earthen pyramids rising from the floodplains, their flat tops crowned with wooden temples reaching toward the sky. Plazas large enough to hold thousands of people, carefully planned neighborhoods, and sophisticated drainage systems that rivaled those of contemporary European cities. This was not the empty wilderness that European explorers would later claim to discover. This was a land shaped by human hands, organized by brilliant minds, and sanctified by deep spiritual understanding. This was the realm of the Mississippian people, and their greatest achievement was a city called Cahokia. Its dawn in the American bottom, that fertile floodplain where the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers converge. The year is 1100 CE, and the city of Cahokia is stirring to life. Steam rises from the river, and the first light of day touches the peak of the great mound that dominates the landscape. From this vantage point, 1,000 years ago, you would have seen one of the most remarkable sights in the ancient world. Spread out before you, covering nearly 6 square miles, was a carefully planned urban center that housed perhaps 20,000 people. At the same time, London had only about 15,000 residents, and Paris was smaller still. But this wasn't just any city. This was a sacred landscape, a place where the earthly and divine intersected, where the movements of the sun and stars guided daily life, and where the very shape of the land had been transformed to reflect the cosmic order as understood by its inhabitants. For centuries, the achievements of the Mississippian people were denied, dismissed, or attributed to anyone other than the indigenous peoples of North America. When European colonists first encountered these massive earthworks, they refused to believe that the Indians they were displacing could have created such wonders. Instead, they invented elaborate theories about lost tribes of Israel, Viking explorers, or extraterrestrial visitors. Anything except the truth that the indigenous peoples of America had created one of the most sophisticated urban centers of the medieval world. But the earth doesn't lie. The careful excavations of modern archaeologists have revealed the truth. That was always there, waiting patiently beneath layers of soil and centuries of willful ignorance. Tonight, we're going to restore this civilization to its rightful place in human history. We'll walk through Cahokia at its height, climb to the top of Monk's Mound, the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, and stand within the wooden circle they called Woodhenge, watching the sun rise precisely where their ancient astronomers intended. We'll explore the sophisticated social structure that made such achievements possible, the trade networks that brought exotic goods from across the continent, and the spiritual beliefs that gave meaning to their monumental efforts. And we'll grapple with the mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Why did this great city eventually decline? What caused a civilization that had flourished for centuries to gradually fade away, leaving only these silent monuments? To mark their passing? This is their story. This is the story of the pyramids of North America, the temples of the prairie, the forgotten metropolis that stood at the heart of a continent. This is the story of Cahokia, and it begins with a simple question that has echoed through the centuries. Who built these monuments of earth and sky? The mist is rising from the river now, just as it did 1,000 years ago. The ancient mounds stand patient and silent, waiting for us to listen to their stories. And in the gentle light of dawn, we begin to understand that some truths are too profound to be written in books. Sometimes they must be written in the earth itself. To understand who built Cahokia, we must first understand who the Mississippian people were, and perhaps more importantly, who they were not. They were not a single tribe or nation, but rather a cultural tradition that spread across much of what is now the southeastern and midwestern United States. Like the term medieval European, Mississippian describes a way of life, a set of shared beliefs and practices that connected diverse communities across vast distances. The Mississippian tradition emerged around 800 CE, growing from earlier woodland cultures that had been developing for thousands of years. These were not nomadic peoples, as so many stereotypes would suggest, but sophisticated agriculturalists who had learned to cultivate the rich floodplains of America's great rivers. They grew corn, beans, and squash in carefully planned fields, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and gathering from the abundant natural resources around them. What distinguished the Mississippian culture was not just their agricultural success, but their remarkable ability to organize complex societies. They built permanent settlements, developed intricate trade networks, and created social hierarchies that allowed them to mobilize thousands of people for massive construction projects. Their towns were often planned with mathematical precision, featuring central plazas surrounded by pyramid-shaped mounds topped with wooden structures. But perhaps most importantly, the Mississippian people were builders. They were engineers who understood soil composition, drainage, and structural integrity. They were astronomers who tracked the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. They were artists who created beautiful pottery, intricate shell carvings, and sophisticated textiles. And they were spiritual people who saw the landscape itself as a canvas for expressing their understanding of the sacred dot. The Mississippian world was interconnected in ways that would surprise many people. Today, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic coast to the Great Plains, communities shared similar architectural styles, religious symbols, and artistic traditions. Shell from the Gulf Coast found its way to settlements in Ohio. Copper from the Great Lakes was worked into ceremonial objects in Georgia. Obsidian from the Rocky Mountains was crafted into tools in Mississippi. This was not a primitive barter system, but a sophisticated trade network that required complex social organization, standardized measures, and diplomatic relationships between distant communities. The Mississippian people were cosmopolitan in the truest sense, connected to a world that spanned much of the continent. Their society was stratified, with clear distinctions between commoners, specialists, and elites. But this hierarchy was not simply about wealth or power in the way we might understand it today. It was deeply intertwined with their spiritual beliefs, with leaders who were seen as intermediaries between the earthly and divine realms. The great mounds were not just monuments to ego, but sacred spaces where the community's relationship with the cosmos was maintained and renewed. The Mississippian people lived in a world where the boundary between the natural and supernatural was fluid. They understood themselves as part of a larger cosmic order, where human actions could influence the movement of the sun, the success of crops, and the harmony of the community. This worldview shaped everything they built, from the orientation of their buildings to the placement of their settlements. They were also skilled warriors when necessary, developing sophisticated military strategies and weapons. But warfare was not their defining characteristic. They were builders, farmers, traders, and keepers of sacred knowledge. They were people who understood that true civilization was not about conquest, but about creating harmony between human communities and the natural world, the Mississippian. Tradition reached its peak between 1050 and 1200 CE, a time when their influence could be felt across much of eastern North America. During this period, they built some of the most impressive earthworks in human history, created art of extraordinary beauty and sophistication, and developed social and political systems that governed hundreds of thousands of people. But who were they as individuals? What were their names, their personal stories, their hopes and dreams? Here we encounter one of the great tragedies of American history. The Mississippian people left no written records, at least none that we can read today. Their history was preserved in oral traditions, in the stories passed down from generation to generation, in the ceremonies that connected past, present, and future. When European diseases and colonization devastated native populations in the centuries that followed, much of this oral history was lost. The descendants of the Mississippian people, including modern Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and many other tribes, retain important connections to this heritage. But the specific details of daily life in ancient Cahokia remain largely mysterious. What we do know comes from archaeology, from the patient work of scientists who have spent decades carefully excavating these ancient sites. They have uncovered tools and pottery, bones and buildings, artwork, and agricultural implements. Each artifact tells part of the story, but the full narrative of who these people were as individuals remains tantalizingly out of reach. This is perhaps why the Mississippian people have been so easy to ignore or misrepresent. Without written records, without individual names and personal stories, it becomes easier to think of them as somehow less than fully human, less worthy of our attention and respect. But the monuments they left behind tell a different story. They speak of a people with vision, with skill, with deep spiritual understanding, and with the ability to create something truly extraordinary. The Mississippian people were not a lost civilization in the dramatic sense that captures popular imagination. They were the ancestors of many modern Native American communities, and their influence can still be felt today in the art, ceremonies, and cultural practices of their descendants. They were not mysterious visitors from another world, but indigenous Americans who developed one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. As we prepare to visit their greatest achievement, the city of Cahokia, we must remember that we are not exploring the ruins of strangers, but the legacy of people who called this continent home for thousands of years before European contact. Their story is not separate from American history, but fundamental to understanding what this land and its people have always been capable of achieving. The morning sun climbs higher over the Mississippi Valley, and the mists begin to clear. In the distance, we can see the great mound rising from the earth like a green pyramid, its slopes covered with grass, but its purpose still clear after 1,000 years. This is where the Mississippian people focused their greatest efforts, where they built something that would endure long after their wooden temples had crumbled and their voices had fallen silent. Let us walk toward that great mound now, imagining the bustling city that once surrounded it, the thousands of people who called it home, and the remarkable civilization that made it all possible. The Mississippian people await us there, not as ghosts or shadows, but as the builders of one of humanity's greatest achievements. As we approach the heart of ancient Cahokia, imagine yourself as a traveler arriving here in the year 1100 CE. You've journeyed for weeks along well-worn paths that follow the great rivers, trading precious goods and hearing stories of a magnificent city that rises from the prairie like something from a dream. Other travelers have told you of earthen pyramids that rival those of distant lands, of plazas that can hold thousands of people, and of leaders who commune with the sun itself. Now, as you crest a small hill overlooking the American bottom, you see it spread before you in all its glory. This is Cahokia at its peak, and it is unlike anything you have ever imagined possible in the world you know. The city stretches as far as the eye can see, covering nearly 6 square miles of carefully planned urban landscape. At its heart rises the Great Mound, a massive pyramid of earth that towers over everything else, its flat summit crowned with wooden buildings that seem to touch the sky. Around this central monument, dozens of smaller mounds create a sacred geography, each one precisely placed according to astronomical alignments that track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. But it is not just the monuments that take your breath away. It is the sheer scale of human activity, the evidence of a civilization that has learned to organize itself on a level that rivals the great cities of the known world. Smoke rises from thousands of hearths scattered across the landscape. Canoes glide along the waterways that have been channeled and directed to serve the city's needs. People move along well-maintained pathways that connect different neighborhoods, carrying goods to market, children to ceremonial gatherings, and offerings to the sacred mounds. This is not a village that has grown large by accident. This is a planned city, designed with the same mathematical precision that would later characterize the great urban centers of Europe and Asia. The placement of each mound, the orientation of each plaza, the routing of each pathway has been carefully calculated to create not just a functional city, but a sacred landscape that reflects the cosmic order as understood by its builders. To truly appreciate what you are seeing, consider that in the year 1100, when Cahokia was at its peak, it was likely the largest city north of Mexico. With a population that may have reached 20,000 people within the city proper, and perhaps another 10,000 in the surrounding communities, Cahokia was larger than London, which had only about 15,000 residents at the time. It was more populous than Paris, more sophisticated than most European cities, and certainly more carefully planned than the chaotic medieval towns that were struggling to emerge from the Dark Ages. But size alone does not capture the true significance of Cahokia. This was not just a large settlement, but a genuine metropolis in every sense of the word. It was a place where people from hundreds of miles away came to trade, to worship, to learn, and to participate in ceremonies that connected the earthly realm with the cosmic order. It was a center of political power, religious authority, and cultural innovation that influenced communities across much of North America. The city was divided into distinct neighborhoods, each with its own character and function. Near the great mound lived the elite families, the priests and leaders who guided the community's spiritual and political life. Their homes were larger and more elaborate than those of common citizens, built on smaller mounds that elevated them both literally and symbolically above the rest of the population. Surrounding these elite residential areas were the neighborhoods of skilled craftspeople, the artists and engineers who created the beautiful pottery, sophisticated tools, and intricate artwork that made Cahokia famous throughout the region. These were not simple farmers, but specialists who had devoted their lives to mastering particular skills that served the broader community. Further from the center lived the farmers and laborers who provided the food and muscle power that kept the city functioning. But even these common citizens lived in well-built houses arranged in orderly neighborhoods, with access to clean water, efficient waste disposal, and the protection that came from being part of a larger, organized community. The city's infrastructure was remarkably sophisticated for its time. A complex system of channels and reservoirs managed water flow, preventing flooding during heavy rains while ensuring adequate supplies during dry periods. Elevated walkways allowed people to move between neighborhoods without disturbing the carefully maintained agricultural areas. Storage facilities preserved surplus food for lean seasons and for the massive feasts that accompany religious ceremonies. But perhaps most impressive was the city's role as a center of learning and innovation. Cahokia was where the Mississippian people perfected their astronomical knowledge, developing calendars that tracked not just the familiar cycles of seasons, but the more complex movements of celestial bodies. It was where they refined their agricultural techniques, learning to maximize crop yields from the rich floodplain soils. It was where they developed new forms of art and architecture that would influence communities hundreds of miles away. The city was also a major center of trade and commerce. Goods flowed into Cahokia from across the continent. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains. These raw materials were worked by skilled craftspeople into finished goods that were then traded throughout the Mississippian world, spreading Cahokia's influence far beyond its immediate borders. Religious ceremonies were central to life in Cahokia, and the city's layout reflected this spiritual focus. The Great Mound was not just a monument to human achievement, but a sacred mountain where the community's relationship with the divine was maintained and renewed. The smaller mounds served as platforms for temples and ceremonial buildings, creating a three-dimensional mandala that connected the earthly city with the celestial realm. During major festivals, the city would swell with visitors from across the region. The great plazas would fill with thousands of people participating in dances, games, and ceremonies that reinforced the social bonds that held the Mississippian world together. These gatherings were not just religious events, but essential political and economic activities that maintained the networks of trade and alliance that made Cahokia's prosperity possible. The city's influence extended far beyond its physical boundaries. Communities hundreds of miles away adopted Cahokian architectural styles, artistic motifs, and religious practices. The city's calendar system spread throughout the region, allowing distant communities to coordinate their agricultural and ceremonial activities. Cahokia had become more than a city. It had become the beating heart of a civilization. Yet, for all its grandeur, Cahokia remained fundamentally connected to the natural world. The city's designers understood that human prosperity depended on maintaining harmony with the cycles of nature. The Great Mound was aligned with the cardinal directions and the movements of the sun. The city's festivals followed the agricultural calendar, celebrating the planting and harvest seasons that sustained all life. As you stand at the edge of this ancient metropolis, watching the sun cast long shadows across the mounds and plazas, you begin to understand that you are witnessing one of humanity's greatest achievements. This is not primitive architecture or simple social organization, but a sophisticated urban civilization that solved complex problems of engineering, governance, and spiritual life with remarkable elegance and efficiency. The people moving through the city around you are not so different from urban dwellers in any age. They worry about their families, take pride in their work, and find meaning in their participation in something larger than themselves. They are builders and dreamers, practical people who have learned to create something extraordinary from the raw materials of earth and human ambition. This is Cahokia in its glory, a city that stands as proof that the indigenous peoples of North America were capable of achievements that rival any civilization in human history. It is a place that challenges our assumptions about the past and reminds us that greatness can emerge anywhere, that human creativity and determination are given the chance to flourish. As the sun reaches its zenith above the Great Mound, casting the entire city in golden light, we prepare to climb that sacred mountain of earth and discover the extraordinary engineering achievement that made all of this possible. The story of Monk's Mound awaits us, a tale of human ambition and spiritual vision that literally moved mountains, one basket of earth at a time. Picture, if you will, the year 1050, while Europe was still awakening from the Dark Ages, while London was a modest settlement of perhaps 15,000 souls clustered around the Thames. Something extraordinary was happening along the banks of the Mississippi River, something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the ancient Americas. Here, where the great river curves gently through the fertile Illinois plains, rose a city that would dwarf most European capitals of its time. They called it many things, but we know it today as Cahokia, though this name comes from a tribe that lived nearby centuries later. The original inhabitants never wrote down what they called their magnificent home, but the very stones and earth remembered that. Imagine walking through this ancient metropolis at its peak. The morning sun rises over a landscape that seems to pulse with human energy. Smoke from thousands of cooking fires drifts lazily skyward, creating a gentle haze that softens the edges of the enormous earthen mounds that dominate the horizon. This is not a small village or a modest settlement. This is a true city, home to as many as 20,000 people, making it larger than London, larger than Paris, larger than any settlement that existed north of Mexico. The scale of Cahokia defies everything we were taught about pre-Columbian America. For too long, the story went that the Americas were sparsely populated, that great cities and complex civilizations were rare exceptions found only in places like Peru or Mexico. But Cahokia tells a different story. It whispers of a North America that was vibrant, populous, and sophisticated beyond our modern imagining. Not as you stand at the edge of this ancient city, your eyes are drawn first to the mounds. Not just one or two, but over 120. Of them, each one carefully positioned, each one serving a purpose in the grand design of this urban landscape. They rise from the earth like sleeping giants, some small and intimate, others towering monuments that seem to touch the very sky. The city spreads across 6 square miles of carefully planned urban space. There are residential areas where families live in sturdy homes built from wood and thatch. There are workshops where skilled craftsmen create pottery, tools, and ornaments. There are plazas where thousands can gather for ceremonies and celebrations. And connecting it all are pathways and roads that speak of careful planning and sophisticated urban design. But perhaps what is most remarkable about Cahokia is not just its size, but its reach. This was not an isolated settlement struggling to survive in the wilderness. This was a cosmopolitan center of trade and culture that connected with communities across the continent. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. All of these flowed through Cahokia, like tributaries feeding a great river. The inhabitants of Cahokia were master farmers who had transformed the surrounding landscape into a productive agricultural system. They grew corn, beans, and squash in carefully tended fields. They harvested nuts and fruits from managed forests. They fished the rich waters of the Mississippi and its tributaries. They created a food system that could support a population density that rivals modern cities. Walking through the residential areas of Cahokia, you would see neighborhoods organized around courtyards and plazas. Families lived in houses built from poles and thatch, structures that were warm in winter and cool in summer. Children played in the dusty streets between homes, their laughter mixing with the sounds of daily life, the rhythmic pounding of mortar and pestles as corn is ground into meal, the gentle scraping of hoes against soil, the distant chanting. From one of the many ceremonial areas, the social organization of Cahokia was complex and sophisticated. This was not a simple tribal society, but a stratified civilization with distinct social classes, specialized occupations, and elaborate systems of governance. At the top were the elite, the rulers and priests who lived atop the great mounds and communicated with the spirit world. Below them were the skilled craftsmen, the traders, the warriors, and the administrators who kept this complex society functioning. And at the base were the farmers and laborers, whose daily work fed and sustained the entire community. But Cahokia was more than just a large settlement. It was a spiritual center, a place where the boundary between the earthly and the divine was particularly thin. The great mounds were not just impressive constructions. They were sacred spaces where elaborate ceremonies connected the community to the cycles of nature, to the movements of the sun and moon, to the ancestors who had passed into the spirit world The city's influence extended far beyond its physical boundaries. Cahokia was the center of what archaeologists call the Mississippian world, a network of communities and trading partners that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic coast to the Great Plains. Smaller versions of Cahokia's mounds and plazas appeared in dozens of other locations, suggesting that this was not just a city, but the capital of a civilization. During the height of its power, Cahokia was a place of pilgrimage, a destination, where people from across the continent came to participate in great ceremonies, to trade goods, to seek spiritual guidance, and to marvel at the engineering achievements of the mound builders. The city would have been a constant bustle of activity, with merchants hawking their wares, priests conducting rituals, craftsmen creating beautiful objects, and families going about their daily lives. The population of Cahokia was not static. Like all great cities, it grew and changed over time. During its peak years, from about 1050 to 1200, the city pulsed with an energy that drew people from hundreds of miles away. Young people came seeking opportunities and adventures. Families migrated from smaller settlements, drawn by the promise of a better life. Skilled craftsmen and traders established themselves in the city's workshops and markets. The diversity of Cahokia's population is reflected in the archaeological record. The burials found in the city's cemeteries show people from many different backgrounds and regions. There were local families who had lived in the area for generations, immigrants from distant territories, and individuals whose burial goods suggest connections to communities as far away as the Rocky Mountains and the Atlantic coast. Yet for all its grandeur, for all its sophistication, Cahokia was still fundamentally an American city, rooted in the deep traditions of the people who had called this continent home for thousands of years. The corn they grew, the pottery they made, the ceremonies they conducted, the stories they told, all of these connected them to ancestors who had lived along these same river valleys since time immemorial. The daily rhythm of life in Cahokia followed patterns that were both ancient and immediate. People woke with the sun, worked in the fields and workshops during the day, and gathered in the evening for meals and storytelling. Seasons marked the great ceremonies, when the entire community would participate in rituals that ensured the continued fertility of the land and the favor of the spirits. As night falls over this ancient city, as the cooking fires bank to glowing embers, and the sounds of the day give way to the gentle murmur of nighttime conversation, we can imagine the sense of pride and accomplishment that must have filled the hearts of Cahokia's inhabitants. They had built something unprecedented, something magnificent, something that would endure for centuries. But they could not have known that their great city would one day be forgotten, that their achievements would be dismissed and denied, that their very existence would be erased from the story that future generations would tell about the Americas. They could not have imagined that the sophisticated urban civilization they had created would be reduced to a few scattered mounds, slowly disappearing beneath the plow and the subdivisions of a later age. For now, in the gentle darkness of this ancient night, Cahokia sleeps peacefully, its mounds rising like dreams against the starlit sky, its people resting in the knowledge that they have created something truly extraordinary here in the heart of North America. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new reasons to be proud of what they have built together. And in the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass, in the gentle lapping of the Mississippi against its banks, in the very soil beneath our feet, Cahokia's story continues to unfold, waiting for those who are willing to listen, to learn, and to remember. As dawn breaks over the great city of Cahokia, the first light reveals the true architectural marvel that these ancient people created. The mounds do not stand alone or randomly scattered across the landscape. Instead, they form a carefully orchestrated symphony of earth and sky, each one positioned with deliberate intention. each one serving a specific purpose in the grand design of this sacred city. There are over 120 mounds at Cahokia, though once there were many more. Time and the plow have claimed some, but those that remain still speak eloquently of the vision and skill of their builders. These are not mere piles of dirt thrown together by accident. They are precisely engineered structures, each one representing thousands of hours of careful planning, skilled labor, and community cooperation. Let us walk together through this ancient cityscape and discover the purpose behind each of these earthen monuments. As we move along the pathways that connect these sacred spaces, we begin to understand that Cahokia was not just a city, but a three-dimensional map of the cosmos itself, where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected in ways both subtle and profound. The most prominent mounds served as platforms for the homes and temples of the elite. These are called platform mounds, and they rise in flat-top terraces that provided elevated spaces for the most important buildings in the community. Imagine climbing the earthen steps that lead to the summit of one of these platforms, feeling the packed earth firm beneath your feet, each step taking you closer to the realm of the sacred. At the top of these platform mounds stood structures that were both magnificent and mysterious. Some were residences for the highest-ranking members of society, the chiefs and priests who governed both the temporal and spiritual affairs of the community. These buildings were constructed with the finest materials available, decorated with intricate carvings and colorful paintings that told the stories of the gods and heroes. Other platform mounds supported temples and ceremonial buildings where the most sacred rituals were performed. These were places where the community gathered to mark the changing seasons, to honor the ancestors, to seek guidance from the spirit world, and to celebrate the great ceremonies that bound the people together in common purpose. The platform mounds are not built all at once, but grew over time as successive generations added new layers of earth and new structures on top. This process, which archaeologists call mound construction phases, created a living architecture that evolved with the community's needs and spiritual understanding. Each new layer represented not just additional height, but also the accumulated wisdom and devotion of the people who built it. But platform mounds were only one type of earthen architecture at Cahokia. There were also conical mounds, which rise from the earth like gentle hills, their rounded forms creating a softer, more natural presence in the landscape. These mounds often served as burial places for important members of the community, their earthen embrace providing eternal rest for those who had served the people well in life. The burial mounds of Cahokia tell us remarkable stories about the social structure and beliefs of this ancient civilization. Some contain the remains of individuals who were clearly of high status, buried with elaborate grave goods that included copper ornaments, shell beads, finely crafted pottery, and ceremonial weapons. These burials suggest a society where certain individuals held positions of great importance and were honored even in death. Other burial mounds contain multiple interments, suggesting family or clan burial grounds where generations of related individuals were laid to rest together. The positioning of these burials, the orientation of the bodies, and the types of grave goods included all provide clues about the spiritual beliefs and social customs of the Mississippian people. There are also ridgetop mounds at Cahokia, elongated earthen structures that follow the natural contours of the landscape. These mounds often served as boundaries or markers, defining sacred spaces and creating visual barriers that separated different areas of the city. They remind us that the builders of Cahokia understood the subtle art of landscape architecture, using earth and elevation to create spaces that were both functional and spiritually meaningful. The arrangement of these mounds creates a series of plazas and courtyards that served as gathering places for the community. The Grand Plaza, the largest of these open spaces, could hold thousands of people during the great ceremonies and celebrations. Picture this vast open area filled with participants in colorful regalia, their voices rising in song and chant, their feet moving in ancient dance patterns that connected them to the rhythms of the earth and sky. These plazas were not empty spaces, but carefully designed theaters for community life. The mounds that surrounded them provided natural amphitheaters where spectators could gather to watch ceremonies, games, and other public events. The acoustics of these spaces were carefully considered, allowing speakers and singers to be heard clearly across the entire gathering. The positioning of the mounds also served practical purposes. The elevated platforms provided commanding views of the surrounding landscape, allowing the leaders of Cahokia to observe approaching visitors, monitor the agricultural fields, and watch for any signs of trouble or opportunity. In a world without modern communication technology, these elevated viewpoints were essential for maintaining awareness and control over the community's territory. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Cahokia's mound system was its astronomical alignment. The builders of this ancient city were skilled astronomers who understood the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. They positioned their mounds to mark important celestial events, creating a kind of earthen calendar that helped the community track the passage of time and schedule their agricultural and ceremonial activities. The mounds create sight lines that point toward the rising sun on the summer and winter solstices, the spring and autumn equinoxes, and other astronomically significant dates. This celestial orientation transformed Cahokia into a kind of observatory, where the movements of the heavens could be tracked and predicted with remarkable accuracy. The construction of these mounds required an enormous investment of time, labor, and resources. Each basketful of earth had to be gathered, carried, and carefully placed by hand. The larger mounds represent millions of individual loads of soil, each one carried by someone who believed deeply in the importance of the work they were doing. This was not slave labor, but community effort on a scale that is difficult for us to imagine today. Entire families, clans, and villages would have participated in the construction projects, working together during the seasons when agricultural demands were less pressing. The mound building was itself a form of ceremony, a way for the community to come together in common purpose and create something that would endure for generations. The diversity of mound types at Cahokia also reflects the complexity of the society that built them. There were mounds for different purposes, different social groups, and different spiritual functions. Some mounds were associated with specific clans or families, others with particular religious societies or craft guilds. This diversity suggests a community that was not monolithic, but rather composed of many different groups working together within a shared cultural framework. The materials used in mound construction were also carefully chosen. Different types of soil and clay were selected for their specific properties, with some layers designed to provide stability and others to create proper drainage. The builders understood the engineering challenges of creating large earthen structures that would remain stable over time, and they developed sophisticated techniques for preventing erosion and collapse. Many of the mounds were topped with wooden structures that have long since decayed, but archaeological evidence allows us to reconstruct their appearance. These buildings were often elaborate constructions with multiple rooms, decorated walls, and carefully planned layouts. They served as residences, temples, council houses, and workshops, depending on their specific function within the community. Pathways between the mounds were also carefully planned and maintained. These were not random trails, but formal roads that connected different areas of the city and facilitated the movement of people and goods. Some of these pathways were raised above the surrounding terrain, creating causeways that remained passable. Even during the seasonal floods that affected the Mississippi River Valley, the mound complex at Cahokia also included smaller earthen features that served specialized purposes. There were small burial mounds for individuals of modest status, platform mounds for clan or family gatherings, and marker mounds that designated special locations or boundaries. Each of these features contributed to the overall design of the city, creating a landscape that was both functional and spiritually meaningful. As we walk through this ancient cityscape, we begin to understand that the mounds of Cahokia were not just impressive constructions, but the physical manifestation of a sophisticated understanding of space, time, and community. They represent the accumulated wisdom of generations of builders who understood how to create spaces that serve both practical and spiritual needs. The mounds also remind us that the people of Cahokia were not nomadic hunters and gatherers, but settled urban dwellers who invested enormous effort in creating permanent structures that would serve their community for centuries. They were builders in the truest sense, people who understood that the creation of lasting monuments required not just skill and labor, but also vision, planning, and unwavering commitment to the future, in the gentle evening light as the shadows of the mounds stretch across the plazas and pathways of Cahokia. We can imagine the satisfaction that the builders must have felt as they looked upon their completed work. They had created something unprecedented in North America, a city of earthen monuments that rivaled the greatest achievements of their time anywhere in the world. Tonight, as we rest in the shadow of these ancient mounds, we can feel the presence of those who built them, their spirits still dwelling in the earth and stone that they shaped with such skill and devotion. The mounds of Cahokia stand as eternal testimony to the power of human cooperation, the beauty of skilled craftsmanship, and the enduring strength of communities that work together to create something greater than themselves. Just beyond the great mounds of Cahokia, in a place where the morning mist clings to the earth like ancient memories, stands one of the most remarkable and mysterious structures ever created by the indigenous peoples of North America. Here, in a carefully chosen location that commands a perfect view of the eastern horizon, the builders of Cahokia erected a series of wooden circles that would serve as their window into the cosmic rhythms that governed their world. They call it wood-henge. Today, this circle of tall cedar posts that once stood like silent sentinels against the prairie sky. The name echoes the famous stone circle of Stonehenge in distant England, but this comparison, while useful, barely captures the unique genius of what the Mississippian astronomers achieved here on the banks of the Mississippi River. Picture, if you will, walking across the dew-covered grass in the early morning light, approaching this sacred circle, as countless pilgrims and observers did over the centuries. The wooden posts rise before you, each one carefully selected, shaped, and positioned according to principles that took generations to perfect. These are not random markers, but precisely calculated instruments in a vast astronomical observatory that rivals any ancient structure in its sophistication and accuracy. The circle consists of 48 posts, though originally there may have been more. Each post is made from red cedar, chosen not only for its durability, but also for its sacred significance to the Mississippian people. Cedar was believed to have protective properties and was often used in ceremonies to purify spaces and connect with the spirit world. The selection of this particular wood was therefore both practical and deeply spiritual. The posts stand in a perfect circle, each one carefully spaced to create specific sight lines toward the horizon. From the center of the circle, an observer can look between any two posts and see a particular section of the eastern sky, where the sun will rise on specific days of the year. This is precision astronomy of the highest order, requiring not only mathematical skill, but also generations of careful observation and record-keeping. The most dramatic demonstration of wood-henge's astronomical function occurs during the summer and winter solstices. On these days, when the sun reaches its extreme northern and southern positions in the sky, it rises in perfect alignment with specific posts in the circle. Standing at the center of Wood-henge on the morning of the summer solstice, you would see the sun appear directly between two posts, creating a sight line that connects the earthbound observer with the celestial mechanics of the cosmos. But Wood-henge was not built merely to mark the solstices. The 48 posts create sight lines that correspond to many other astronomically significant events throughout the year. The equinoxes, when day and night are equal in length, are marked by their own special alignments. The rising points of certain stars and star clusters that were important to Mississippian ceremony and agriculture are also encoded in the positioning of the posts. The builders of Woodhenge understood that the sun's rising point changes throughout the year, moving gradually from south to north and back again in an annual cycle that governs the seasons. By creating a circle of posts that marked these different rising points, they constructed a calendar that could be read simply by observing where the sun appeared each morning. This was practical astronomy that served the needs of a complex agricultural society. The construction of Woodhenge required not only astronomical knowledge, but also remarkable engineering skill. Each post had to be precisely positioned and oriented to create the correct sight lines. The circle had to be perfectly round, the posts had to be exactly vertical, and the entire structure had to be aligned with the true cardinal directions. This level of precision suggests that the builders had access to sophisticated measuring techniques and mathematical knowledge that we are only beginning to understand. Archaeological evidence suggests that Woodhenge was rebuilt several times over the centuries, with each new version slightly different from the last. This ongoing construction and reconstruction indicates that the astronomical knowledge of the Mississippian people was not static, but continued to evolve and improve over time. Each generation of astronomers added their own observations and refinements to the structure, creating a living instrument that grew more accurate with each rebuilding. The location of Woodhenge was chosen with great care. It sits on a slight rise in the landscape that provides an unobstructed view of the eastern horizon. This elevated position was necessary for accurate astronomical observation, as any hills or trees in the eastern distance would have interfered with the sight lines. The proximity to the great mounds of Cahokia was also significant, as it connected the astronomical observations directly to the ceremonial and political center of the community, the knowledge required to design and build. Woodhenge was held by specialist astronomer priests who dedicated their lives to studying the movements of the heavens. These individuals were among the most respected members of Mississippian society, as their understanding of celestial cycles was essential for timing agricultural activities, scheduling ceremonies, and maintaining the spiritual health of the community. The astronomical knowledge encoded in Woodhenge was not merely theoretical, but had profound practical applications. The timing of corn planting, for example, had to be precisely calculated to ensure that the crop would mature before the first frost. The scheduling of important ceremonies needed to coincide with specific astronomical events that were believed to enhance their spiritual power. The prediction of eclipses and other celestial phenomena was important for maintaining the authority and credibility of the priestly class, but Woodhenge was more than just a practical tool for timekeeping and agricultural planning. It was also a sacred space where the community gathered to witness the great celestial events that punctuated the year. The summer solstice sunrise, viewed through the posts of Woodhenge, would have been a profound spiritual experience that connected the observers with the cosmic order that governed their world. The ceremonies that took place at Woodhenge were elaborate affairs that involved the entire community. On the morning of the solstice, hundreds of people would gather in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for the moment when the sun would appear in perfect alignment with the posts. The appearance of the sun at the predicted location would have been seen as confirmation that the cosmic order was intact and that the community remained in harmony with the natural world. The design of Woodhenge also reflects the sophisticated understanding of geometry and mathematics that the Mississippian people possessed. The circle is not just any circle, but one whose dimensions and proportions were carefully calculated to create the desired astronomical effects. The spacing of the posts, the diameter of the circle, and the height of the posts all had to be precisely determined to make the instrument function correctly. The builders of Woodhenge also understood the importance of maintaining accurate records of their observations. While they left no written records in the conventional sense, they encoded their astronomical knowledge in the very structure of the circle itself. Each post position represents countless hours of observation and calculation, creating a permanent record of their understanding of celestial mechanics. The accuracy of Woodhenge as an astronomical instrument rivals that of any ancient observatory. Modern archaeoastronomers who have studied the structure have confirmed that the sight lines are precise enough to predict astronomical events with remarkable accuracy. This level of precision could only have been achieved through generations of careful observation and sophisticated mathematical calculation. The influence of Woodhenge extended far beyond Cahokia itself. Similar wooden circles and astronomical structures have been found at other Mississippian sites throughout the Southeast and Midwest, suggesting that the astronomical knowledge developed at Cahokia was shared with other communities in the region. This dissemination of astronomical knowledge was part of the broader cultural influence that Cahokia exerted over much of eastern North America. The builders of Woodhenge were part of a long tradition of indigenous astronomy that stretched back thousands of years. Native American peoples had been observing and recording celestial events long before the rise of Cahokia, and this accumulated knowledge provided the foundation for the sophisticated astronomical achievements of the Mississippian period. The wooden posts of Woodhenge have long since decayed, but archaeological techniques have allowed researchers to identify the post holes and reconstruct the original appearance of the structure. Modern replicas have been built that allow visitors to experience the astronomical alignments just as the original builders intended. These reconstructions help us understand the remarkable achievement that Woodhenge represents. As we stand in the center of this ancient circle, watching the sun rise between the carefully positioned posts, we cannot help but feel a sense of awe at the sophistication and dedication of the people who created this remarkable structure. They were not primitive peoples struggling to survive in a harsh wilderness, but skilled astronomers and engineers who possessed a deep understanding of the cosmos and the mathematical principles that govern celestial mechanics. The legacy of Woodhenge reminds us that the indigenous peoples of North America were accomplished scientists and mathematicians who made significant contributions to human knowledge. Their astronomical achievements deserve to be recognized and celebrated alongside those of any ancient civilization. In the gentle morning light filtering through the reconstructed posts, we can almost hear the voices of the ancient astronomers, sharing their knowledge with the next generation and ensuring that the wisdom of the stars would never be forgotten. Tonight, as the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, we can imagine the astronomer priests of Cahokia making their careful observations, recording the movements of the celestial bodies, and planning the next refinement to their wooden circle. Their dedication to understanding the cosmos was not just an intellectual pursuit, but a sacred duty that connected their community to the divine order of the universe. In their patient observations and precise calculations, they found not just practical knowledge, but spiritual truth that sustained their people for generations. As the morning sun climbs higher over the great mounds of Cahokia, casting long shadows across the ceremonial plazas, we begin to glimpse the intricate social tapestry that held this remarkable civilization together. This was not a simple society of equals working together in harmony, but rather a complex hierarchy where power, privilege, and spiritual authority were carefully woven into the very fabric of daily life. At the apex of this social pyramid stood a figure both magnificent and mysterious, a ruler whose authority derived not merely from political power or military might, but from a direct connection to the divine forces that governed the universe. The people of Cahokia, called their supreme leader by many names, but perhaps the most evocative was the Great Sun, a title that spoke to the cosmic nature of their authority and the sacred light that was believed to flow through their very being. Picture, if you will, this divine ruler awakening in the pre-dawn darkness atop the great platform mound that served as both palace and temple. The residence that crowns this earthen mountain is unlike any other dwelling in Cahokia, built with the finest materials and decorated with symbols that proclaim its occupants' connection to the spirit world. The walls are adorned with intricate paintings depicting the cosmic cycles, the adventures of culture heroes, and the genealogies that connect the ruler to the first beings who emerge from the earth. The Great Sun does not wake alone, but is attended by a carefully selected retinue of servants, advisors, and spiritual attendants whose lives are dedicated to maintaining the ritual purity and divine nature of their sovereign. These individuals, chosen from birth for their sacred duties, understand that they serve not just a political leader, but a living embodiment of the cosmic order itself. The morning rituals that begin each day in the ruler's residence are elaborate ceremonies that connect the earthbound community with the celestial realm. The Great Sun must greet the rising sun with specific prayers and offerings, for they are believed to be the earthly representative of the solar deity, responsible for ensuring that the sun continues its daily journey across the sky. This is not mere symbolism, but a profound spiritual responsibility that weighs heavily upon the ruler's shoulders. The social structure of Cahokia was organized around this central figure in a series of carefully defined ranks and classes. Immediately below the Great Sun were the nobles, individuals who claimed descent from divine ancestors and who served as the ruler's primary advisors, military commanders, and religious specialists. These nobles lived in fine houses built on smaller platform mounds, their elevated position both literal and figurative, marking their status as intermediaries between the divine ruler and the common people. The noble class was not monolithic, but contained its own internal hierarchy based on closeness to the royal bloodline, spiritual power, and administrative responsibility. Some nobles served as priests, maintaining the sacred fires that burned perpetually in the temples and conducting the rituals that ensured the community's continued prosperity. Others were war chiefs, responsible for defending Cahokia's territory and extending its influence over neighboring communities. Still others were skilled craftsmen who created the elaborate regalia and ceremonial objects that displayed the ruler's divine status. Below, the nobles were the skilled artisans and specialists who provided the goods and services that sustained Cahokia's complex society. These included the potters who created the fine ceramics that were traded throughout the Mississippian world, the metal workers who fashioned copper ornaments and ceremonial objects, the stone carvers who created the intricate sculptures that adorned the temples, and the textile workers who wove the elaborate garments worn by the elite. These skilled workers enjoyed a relatively high status within Cahokian society, as their abilities were essential to maintaining the material culture that supported the ruling class. They lived in substantial houses arranged around courtyards and workshops, their neighborhoods forming distinct districts within the larger city. Many of these artisans were organized into guilds or craft societies that maintained trade secrets and regulated the quality of their products. That the largest segment of Cahokia society consisted of the farmers and laborers, whose daily work provided the food and raw materials that sustained the entire community. These individuals lived in the residential areas that surrounded the ceremonial center, their modest homes built from local materials and arranged in family compounds that reflected kinship relationships and clan affiliations. But even among the common people, there were distinctions of status and privilege. Some farmers controlled larger and more productive plots of land, while others worked as tenants or laborers on the estates of the nobility. Some specialized in particular crops or agricultural techniques that were especially valued by the community. The most successful farmers might accumulate enough wealth and influence to marry into the noble class, though such social mobility was rare and carefully controlled. The divine nature of kingship at Cahokia was not merely a political convenience, but a deeply held belief that shaped every aspect of the ruler's existence. The great sun was believed to be descended from the celestial deities, particularly the sun god, and this divine bloodline was carefully maintained through elaborate marriage restrictions and genealogical records. The ruler's body itself was considered sacred, requiring special treatments and protections to maintain its spiritual purity. The daily life of the great sun was governed by an elaborate protocol that reinforced their divine status. They ate only certain foods, prepared by specially designated cooks, and served in vessels that were used by no one else. They wore distinctive clothing and ornaments that marked their cosmic identity, including elaborate headdresses decorated with symbols of the sun, moon, and stars. Their movements were carefully choreographed to ensure that they always appeared in public settings that emphasized their elevated status. The ruler's residence atop the Great Mound was designed to serve as both a palace and a temple, with specific areas designated for different types of ceremonies and audiences. The throne room, where the great sun received visitors and made important decisions, was positioned to catch the first rays of the morning sun, literally illuminating the ruler with divine light. The private chambers where the ruler slept and conducted personal rituals were oriented according to astronomical alignments that connected the earthly residence with the celestial realm. The power of the great sun extended far beyond the boundaries of Cahokia itself. This divine ruler was recognized as the supreme authority over a network of smaller communities and settlements that acknowledged Cahokia's hegemony. These tributary settlements sent regular offerings of food, crafts, and exotic materials to the capital, and their own local rulers were required to seek confirmation of their authority from the great sun. The succession of divine rulers at Cahokia was a matter of cosmic importance, as the wrong choice could disrupt the spiritual harmony that maintained the community's prosperity. The new ruler had to be not only from the proper bloodline, but also capable of maintaining the complex relationships with the spirit world that were essential to effective leadership. The selection process involved elaborate divination ceremonies and tests of spiritual fitness that could take months or even years to complete. The coronation of a new great sun was one of the most spectacular ceremonies in the Mississippian world, drawing visitors from across the continent to witness the installation of a new divine ruler. The ceremony began with purification rituals that prepared the candidate for their cosmic transformation. The actual coronation took place at sunrise on an astronomically significant date, with the new ruler literally receiving the divine light that would empower their reign. The regalia worn by the great sun during public ceremonies was itself a work of art that proclaimed their divine nature. The elaborate headdress, crafted from rare feathers, copper ornaments, and shell beads, was designed to represent the sun surrounded by its rays. The ceremonial clothing, woven from the finest fibers and decorated with intricate patterns, told the story of the ruler's divine ancestry and cosmic responsibilities. The great sun's divine authority was supported by a complex system of ritual observances and ceremonial displays that reinforced their special status in the minds of the people. Regular festivals celebrated the ruler's connection to the seasonal cycles, with elaborate pageants that depicted the cosmic dramas in which the great sun played a central role. These ceremonies were not mere entertainment, but essential rituals that maintained the spiritual equilibrium of the community. The burial practices associated with the ruling class at Cahokia provide striking evidence of their elevated status and divine nature. When a great sun died, their funeral was a massive public ceremony that involved the entire community. The ruler's body was prepared with elaborate rituals and buried with an incredible array of grave goods, including fine pottery, copper ornaments, shell beads, and exotic materials from across the continent. But perhaps most remarkably, some rulers were buried with human companions, individuals who chose or were chosen to accompany their sovereign into the afterlife. These companion burials, found in some of the most elaborate tombs at Cahokia, suggest that the divine nature of kingship was believed to extend beyond death, requiring continued service and support in the spirit world. The social hierarchy of Cahokia was not rigid or unchanging, but evolved over time as the community grew and developed. New noble families rose to prominence through successful military campaigns, skilled craftsmanship, or spiritual achievements. The priestly class gained influence as the ceremonial aspects of government became more elaborate. The merchant class developed greater autonomy as long-distance trade became more important to the community's prosperity. Yet throughout all these changes, the fundamental principle of divine kingship remained constant. The great sun continued to serve as the essential link between the earthly community and the cosmic order, their sacred presence ensuring that the sun would rise each day, the seasons would follow their appointed course, and the community would continue to prosper under divine protection. As the day progresses and the great sun emerges from the palace to conduct the daily audiences and ceremonies that maintain the spiritual health of the community, we can see how this complex social hierarchy functioned in practice. Each individual knew their place in the cosmic order, from the humblest farmer to the most exalted noble. Each had roles and responsibilities that contributed to the greater good of the community. The divine kingship of Cahokia was not a system of oppression, but a sacred contract between the ruler and the people. The great sun's divine authority came with enormous responsibilities, requiring them to maintain the spiritual practices that ensured the community's continued prosperity. In return, the people provided the labor, tribute, and reverence that supported the ruler's divine status and enabled them to fulfill their cosmic duties. As evening approaches and the great sun prepares for the sunset ceremonies that will end the official day, we can appreciate the profound beauty and complexity of this ancient system of governance. It was a civilization that understood the importance of connecting political authority with spiritual responsibility, creating a form of leadership that served both earthly and cosmic purposes. In the gentle twilight that bathes the great mounds of Cahokia, we can still feel the presence of these divine rulers, their legacy written in the very earth and sky that they served so faithfully. As the morning mist lifts from the great plazas of Cahokia, the city awakens to the familiar rhythms of daily life that have sustained this remarkable community for generations. Beyond the ceremonial grandeur of the mounds and the divine authority of the great sun, there exists a vibrant tapestry of human activity that forms the true heart of this ancient metropolis. Here, in the neighborhoods and marketplaces, in the fields and workshops, ordinary people go about their daily tasks with the same hopes, dreams, and concerns that have motivated human communities throughout history. The day begins early in Cahokia, as it does in farming communities everywhere. Before the sun has fully risen above the eastern horizon, the farmers who live in the residential areas surrounding the ceremonial center are already making their way to the extensive agricultural fields that stretch across the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River. These fields, carefully maintained and expanded over generations, represent one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems in pre-Columbian North America. The foundation of Cahokian agriculture rests on what indigenous peoples call the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. These crops, grown together in carefully planned combinations, create a sustainable agricultural system that maximizes both yield and soil fertility. The tall corn stalks provide natural poles for the bean vines to climb, while the beans fix nitrogen in the soil that nourishes the corn. The broad squash leaves spread across the ground, shading the soil to retain moisture and prevent weeds from taking hold. But the agricultural system of Cahokia extends far beyond these three primary crops. The farmers also cultivate sunflowers for their nutritious seeds and oil, gourds for containers and tools, and a variety of native plants that provide food, medicine, and materials for crafts. The nearby forests are carefully managed to provide nuts, berries, and other wild foods that supplement the agricultural harvest. The rivers and streams yield fish, freshwater mussels, and waterfowl that add protein and variety to the community's diet. The agricultural work is organized around the seasonal cycle, with different times of year requiring different types of labor and community cooperation. Spring is the season of preparation, when the fields are cleared of winter debris and the soil is prepared for planting. The timing of planting is crucial, and the farmer astronomers who understand the celestial calendar work closely with the priests to determine the most auspicious dates for sowing the seeds. The actual planting is often a community effort, with extended families and neighborhood groups working together to ensure that all the fields are planted in the optimal time. Window. The work is accompanied by songs and stories that connect the agricultural cycle to the spiritual beliefs of the community. The planting of corn is particularly sacred, as this crop is believed to be a gift from the gods and the foundation of human life itself. Summer is the season of cultivation and growth, when the farmers tend their crops with careful attention to watering, weeding, and pest control. The agricultural fields of Cahokia are not simply planted and left to grow wild, but are managed with sophisticated techniques that maximize productivity. Irrigation channels direct water from the rivers to the fields during dry periods. Terracing and raised beds improve drainage and prevent erosion. Companion planting and crop rotation maintain soil fertility and reduce plant diseases. The harvest season brings the entire community together in a celebration of abundance and gratitude. The corn harvest is the most important event of the agricultural year, as this crop provides the staple food that sustains the community through the winter months. The harvest begins with elaborate ceremonies that honor the corn spirit and ensure that the crop will continue to bless the community in future years. The harvested corn is processed in various ways to create different types of food. Some is ground into meal for making bread and porridge. Some is dried on the cob for long-term storage. Some is processed into hominy by treating it with wood ash, which makes the nutrients more available and creates a different texture and flavor. The corn processing is primarily women's work, requiring skill and knowledge that is passed down from mother to daughter through generations. The agricultural surplus produced by Cahokia's farmers supports not only the local population, but also the extensive trade networks that connect the city to communities across the continent. The surplus corn, beans, and squash are traded for exotic goods that cannot be produced locally, including copper from the Great Lakes region, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains. The marketplace of Cahokia is a wonder to behold, a bustling center of commerce that brings together traders and craftspeople from across the known world. The main market plaza, located near the center of the city, is surrounded by temporary stalls and permanent shops where goods from across the continent are displayed and exchanged. The air is filled with the sounds of bargaining, the calls of vendors advertising their wares, and the languages of dozens of different peoples who have come to trade. The local craftspeople of Cahokia are skilled artisans who create goods that are prized throughout the Mississippian world. The potters produce beautiful vessels decorated with intricate designs that tell stories of gods and heroes. The shell workers create beads, pendants, and ceremonial objects from marine shells obtained through trade. The coppersmiths fashion ornaments and tools from the pure copper that arrives from the northern mines. The textile workers weave fine fabrics from plant fibers and create elaborate garments for the elite. The market is not just a place of commerce, but also a social center where news is shared, friendships are maintained, and cultural exchanges take place. Traders bring not only goods, but also stories, songs, and ideas from distant lands. The marketplace serves as a conduit for the spread of artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations across the vast networks of the Mississippian world. The daily rhythm of life in Cahokia is punctuated by regular festivals and ceremonies that mark the passage of time and strengthen the bonds of community. These celebrations are not merely entertainment, but essential rituals that maintain the spiritual health of the community and ensure its continued prosperity. The festival calendar is closely tied to the agricultural cycle, with major celebrations occurring at planting time, during the growing season, and at harvest. The Spring Planting Festival is a time of renewal and hope when the community gathers to celebrate the return of life to the earth. The ceremony begins before dawn with the lighting of new fires and the blessing of the seeds that will be planted in the coming days. The festival includes dancing, singing, and storytelling that connect the present community to the ancestral spirits who first brought agriculture to the people. The summer festivals celebrate the growth and abundance of the crops, with elaborate ceremonies that honor the spirits of the corn, beans, and squash. These festivals often include competitive games and athletic contests that demonstrate the strength and skill of the community's young people. The most popular game is Chunky, played with a stone disc and wooden spears, which requires great skill and is often accompanied by elaborate betting and social display. The Harvest Festival is the most important celebration of the year, a time when the entire community comes together to give thanks for the abundance of the earth and to share in the fruits of their collective labor. The festival begins with the ritual harvesting of the first corn, conducted by the priests and the great sun in a ceremony that ensures the continued blessing of the corn spirit. This is followed by days of feasting, dancing, and celebration that involve every member of the community. The daily diet of the average Cahokian family is both nutritious and varied, reflecting the sophisticated agricultural system and extensive trade networks that support the community. The staple foods are corn-based dishes such as hominy, cornbread, and corn porridge, supplemented by beans, squash, and other vegetables. Meat comes from hunting deer, elk, and smaller game, as well as from domesticated dogs and turkeys. Fish and shellfish from the rivers provide additional protein, while nuts, berries, and wild plants add variety and important nutrients. The preparation and consumption of food is surrounded by customs and rituals that reflect the spiritual significance of eating. Meals are often accompanied by prayers of gratitude to the spirits who provide the food. Certain foods are reserved for special occasions or ceremonial use. The sharing of food is an important expression of hospitality and community solidarity, with wealthy families expected to provide feasts for their neighbors and visitors. The morning mist rises from the Mississippi River like the breath of sleeping giants, carrying with it whispers of a question that has haunted these fertile plains for 7 centuries. Picture, if you will, the great city of Cahokia in its final days around the year 1250. The sun still rises over Monk's Mound, casting long shadows across the grand plaza where thousands once gathered for ceremonies that connected earth to sky. But something has changed. The bustling marketplaces grow quieter each season. The great wooden stockades that once protected the city's heart stand like silent sentinels, their purpose becoming increasingly unclear. To understand what happened to Cahokia, we must imagine ourselves walking through its streets during those twilight years. The massive earthen pyramids still dominate the landscape, their terraced sides climbing toward the heavens like ancient stairways. But if you listen carefully, you can hear the subtle signs of change. The rhythm of daily life has shifted. Where once the morning air carried the sounds of thousands of voices, the chatter of busy markets, and the rhythmic pounding of corn being ground into meal, now there are pockets of silence, buildings standing empty, grass beginning to reclaim, paths that were once worn smooth by countless feet. The great civilization that had flourished here for 4 centuries was facing challenges that would prove insurmountable. Like a complex symphony gradually losing its instruments, the intricate web of Cahokian society was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, season by season. Climate, that invisible force that shapes all human destiny, was shifting beneath their feet. The medieval warm period, that gentle embrace of favorable weather that had nurtured Cahokia's rise, was coming to an end. For generations, the people had enjoyed relatively stable rainfall and temperatures that made their rich agricultural system possible. Their ancestors had learned to cultivate maize, that golden grain that would become the foundation of their prosperity. The warm, moist conditions had allowed them to develop sophisticated farming techniques, creating surplus food that could support not just farmers, but artisans, priests, traders, and rulers. But around 1200, the climate began to whisper warnings that would soon become shouts. The Little Ice Age was approaching, though the Cahokians had no name for what they were experiencing. They knew only that the rains became less reliable, that growing seasons shortened, that the predictable patterns their grandparents had known were shifting like sand beneath their feet. The vast cornfields that surrounded their city, those golden seas of grain that had made their urban experiment possible, began to yield less and less. Imagine a Cahokian farmer in those days, walking through his fields in the early morning light. The corn stalks, once tall and proud, now struggled to reach their full height. The kernels that formed were smaller, less plentiful. The beans and squash that grew alongside the corn, part of the sacred Three Sisters agricultural system, also showed signs of stress. The soil, after centuries of intensive cultivation, was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. The careful balance between human need and natural abundance was tilting toward scarcity. The archaeological evidence tells us a story written in layers of earth and fragments of pottery. Researchers have found that around this time, there are signs of increasing conflict. The great wooden stockade that surrounded the city's ceremonial center was rebuilt multiple times, each reconstruction more formidable than the last. Watchtowers were constructed, their builders clearly expecting trouble. In the surrounding areas, smaller settlements began to fortify themselves or were abandoned entirely. The peaceful trading relationships that had once connected Cahokia to distant regions began to fray, but the challenges facing Cahokia were not merely external. The very success of the city had created internal pressures that were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. At its peak, Cahokia may have supported 20,000 people within the city proper, with perhaps another 50,000 in the surrounding region. This was a population density unprecedented in North America north of Mexico. The logistics of feeding, housing, and governing such a large population required constant innovation and adaptation. The social hierarchy that had enabled Cahokia's rise was also contributing to its decline. The elite who lived atop the great mounds and controlled the city's resources were increasingly divorced from the common people who worked the fields and crafted the goods that sustained the urban center. As resources became scarcer, the gap between rich and poor likely widened. The elaborate ceremonies and monumental construction projects that had once unified the community may have begun to feel burdensome to people struggling to feed their families. Consider the psychological impact of these changes on the Cahokian people. Their entire worldview was built around the idea of harmony between the human and natural worlds. The great mounds were not just impressive architecture. They were sacred spaces where the boundaries between earth and sky, between the human and divine, were made tangible. The careful astronomical alignments, the seasonal ceremonies, The elaborate burial practices, all of these, were part of a coherent system that made sense of existence and provided stability in an uncertain world. As their agricultural system faltered and their social order became strained, the Cahokians would have looked to their spiritual leaders for answers. The priests and shamans who had once confidently predicted the movements of the sun and stars, who had claimed to maintain the cosmic balance through their rituals, were now presiding over a world that seemed increasingly out of balance. Very foundations of their belief system were being tested by circumstances beyond their control. The great plaza that had once hosted thousands during the summer solstice ceremonies began to see smaller gatherings. The elaborate feasts that had reinforced social bonds and hierarchies became less frequent as food became scarcer. The trading networks that had brought exotic goods from the Gulf Coast, the Great Lakes, and the Rocky Mountains began to contract as distant partners faced their own challenges or turned to other sources of supply. Archaeological evidence suggests that by 1300, the process of abandonment was well underway. This was not a sudden catastrophe, not a dramatic collapse that happened overnight. Instead, it was a gradual migration, a slow exodus that unfolded over decades. Families began to leave for smaller settlements, where the challenges of survival might be more manageable. Some may have joined related groups in the surrounding river valleys. Others may have traveled great distances to establish new communities far from the troubles of their homeland. The great wooden buildings that had once housed the city's elite were left to weather and decay. The carefully maintained plazas where thousands had gathered for ceremonies became overgrown with grass and wildflowers. The intricate systems of government and religion that had coordinated the lives of so many people gradually dissolved as the population dispersed. The great experiment in urban living that had been Cahokia was coming to an end, but we must not think of this as a simple story of failure. The people of Cahokia were not victims of some inevitable fate. They were intelligent, adaptable human beings who made rational decisions based on the information available to them. As conditions in their great city became increasingly difficult, they chose to seek better opportunities elsewhere. Their descendants continued to live and thrive in smaller communities throughout the Mississippi River Valley and beyond. The knowledge and skills that had built Cahokia did not disappear with the city. The agricultural techniques, the artistic traditions, the spiritual practices, and the social innovations that had made the great urban center possible were carried forward by the people who left. The Mississippian cultural tradition continued, in modified forms for centuries, adapting to new circumstances and new challenges. By 1400, the great city was largely empty. The massive earthen mounds still rose from the floodplain, but the wooden structures that had crowned them had fallen into ruin. The grand plaza where thousands had once gathered for ceremonies lay silent under the prairie grass. The sophisticated drainage systems that had managed flooding were clogged with debris. Nature was beginning the slow process of reclaiming what humanity had built. The last residents of Cahokia may have looked back at the great mounds as they departed, carrying with them memories of a time when their ancestors had built something magnificent. They could not have known that their city would be forgotten by history, that later generations would struggle to understand what had happened in this place. They knew only that the time had come to seek new homes, to adapt once again to a changing world, to carry forward the best of their heritage, while leaving behind what no longer served them. And so the great city of Cahokia entered its long sleep, waiting through the centuries for archaeologists and historians to rediscover its story. The earthen pyramids stood as silent testimony to human achievement, their surfaces gradually softened by wind and rain, their stories buried beneath layers of prairie soil. The Mississippi River continued its eternal journey to the sea, carrying with it the memory of a time when its banks supported one of the greatest cities in the world. The abandonment of Cahokia reminds us that all human achievements, no matter how magnificent, are subject to the forces of change. Climate, environment, society, and time itself are constantly shifting, requiring each generation to adapt or face decline. The people of Cahokia faced these challenges with dignity and wisdom, choosing to preserve their humanity rather than cling to a way of life that was no longer sustainable. Their story is not one of failure, but of resilience, adaptation, and the eternal human capacity to begin again. As we drift towards sleep tonight, let us remember that the silence of Cahokia is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of thousands of voices, the memory of great achievements, and the promise that human creativity and adaptability can overcome even the greatest challenges. The great mounds still stand, patient and eternal, keeping watch over the prairie, waiting for those who would listen to their ancient wisdom about the cycles of rise and renewal that define all human existence. The morning sun casts long shadows across the Illinois prairie, where the great mounds of Cahokia rise like sleeping giants from the earth. But for centuries after the city's abandonment, these magnificent monuments to human achievement would be shrouded not only in morning mist, but in willful blindness and deliberate denial. The story of how Cahokia was forgotten, then rediscovered, then denied, is itself a tale of human nature, prejudice, and the dangerous power of myth to obscure truth. Imagine, if you will, the first European explorers to venture into this river valley. In 1673, French missionaries Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet paddled down the Mississippi River, their birch bark canoes carrying them past the very spot where Cahokia had once thrived. But these men, their eyes trained to recognize European notions of civilization, saw only empty prairie and scattered mounds that seemed to them like natural hills. They reported finding no Indians in the area, missing entirely the magnitude of what lay beneath their feet. It was French monks in the mid-1700s who first truly noticed the great earthen pyramids. Standing at the base of the largest mound, they must have craned their necks to take in its immense proportions. This structure, taller than a 10-story building and covering more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza, demanded explanation. But rather than seek to understand its true origins, they simply named it after themselves, calling it Monk's Mound. The original name, spoken by the people who built it, was lost to time, replaced by the casual presumption of European naming rights. The monks' reports filtered back to the growing settlements along the eastern seaboard, where educated colonists began to grapple with the troubling question: how could such massive and sophisticated earthworks exist in a land they had been taught was inhabited only by simple nomadic savages? The very existence of these monuments challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of Native American society and capability. Among the first to seriously investigate these mysteries was Thomas Jefferson, the towering intellect of the American Enlightenment. In the 1780s, Jefferson conducted what may have been the first scientific archaeological excavation in North America when he carefully dug through a burial mound on his Virginia property. His methodical approach and detailed observations led him to a conclusion that should have settled the matter once and for all. The mounds, Jefferson declared, were clearly the work of Native Americans, the ancestors of the tribes still living in the region. But Jefferson's scientific approach was swimming against a powerful current of prejudice and self-interest. Young American nation was in the process of expanding westward, pushing Native American tribes from their ancestral lands. This expansion required moral justification, and what better justification than the belief that the current inhabitants were not the legitimate heirs to the land's greatest achievements? And so began one of the most persistent and damaging myths in American history, the legend of the Mound Builders. This myth painted a picture of a lost race of industrious, intelligent, and civilized people who had once inhabited North America. These mysterious mound builders, the story went, had created all the great earthworks scattered across the continent before being conquered and exterminated by the savage tribes that European settlers encountered. The myth gained momentum through the writings of men like Josiah Priest, whose 1833 book, American Antiquities, reached a wide audience hungry for explanations that confirmed their existing beliefs. Priest and others like him wove elaborate theories about the origins of these lost people. Some claimed they were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, carried to America by divine providence. Others suggested they were survivors of Atlantis, or perhaps early Welsh or Irish explorers, or even refugees from the Tower of Babel. The more elaborate the theory, the more it seemed to capture the American imagination. The idea of a lost white race, noble and industrious, perfectly suited the needs of a nation seeking to justify its treatment of Native Americans. If the current tribes were merely the destroyers of a superior civilization, then European conquest could be seen as a kind of historical justice, a restoration of proper order. This mythology found its way into popular culture, literature, and even scientific discourse. Magazines published sensational articles about the mysterious mound builders. Novels romanticized their imagined civilization. Even supposedly serious scholars contributed to the myth, publishing books with titles like The Mound Builders, being an account of a lost race, and American Antiquities and Discoveries in the West. The persistence of these beliefs reveals something troubling about 19th century American society. Even when faced with clear evidence to the contrary, even when Native American elders spoke of their own ancestors' achievements, the myth persisted. It was as if the truth was too uncomfortable to acknowledge, too challenging to the narrative of American manifest destiny. Consider the psychological mechanisms at work here. To acknowledge that Native Americans had built Cahokia and the other great mound complexes would have meant acknowledging that they possessed sophisticated engineering knowledge, complex social organization, and artistic capabilities that rivaled those of European civilizations. It would have meant recognizing that the people being displaced and destroyed were not primitive savages, but the heirs to a rich and complex cultural heritage. The myth also served to minimize the magnitude of what was being lost. If the great earthworks were the products of a vanished race, then their destruction was merely the inevitable result of historical processes beyond human control. But if they were the sacred sites and ceremonial centers of living cultures, then their desecration represented a profound moral failing. Archaeological evidence was repeatedly ignored or misinterpreted to support the myth. When pottery fragments were found that clearly showed continuity between the mound builders and historic Native American tribes, they were dismissed as crude imitations. When burial patterns matched those of known Native American groups, they were explained as evidence of the conquered survivors adopting the customs of their conquerors. The myth was so pervasive that it influenced government policy. The Smithsonian Institution, founded in 1846, was initially reluctant to study Native American cultures because they were viewed as primitive and unworthy of serious scientific attention. Instead, resources were devoted to searching for evidence of the mysterious mound builders, a quest that led researchers further and further from the truth. It was not until the late 19th century that serious archaeological work began to challenge the myth. Scholars like Cyrus Thomas, working for the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology, conducted systematic excavations and careful analysis of artifacts. In 1894, Thomas published a comprehensive report that definitively established the Native American origins of the mounds. His work was thorough, scientific, and irrefutable. The mounds, he concluded, were built by the ancestors of the Native American tribes still living in the region. But even scientific proof could not easily dislodge a myth that had become so deeply embedded in American consciousness. The mound builder legend persisted well into the 20th century, kept alive by amateur archaeologists, popular writers, and those who found it politically convenient to deny Native American Achievements. The story of Cahokia's denial is thus not merely a tale of archaeological confusion, but a reflection of the deeper currents of American history. It shows how prejudice can blind us to evidence, how mythology can be more powerful than truth, and how the need to justify our actions can lead us to create elaborate false narratives. The great earthen pyramids of Cahokia stood through all of this, silent witnesses to the truth that was being denied. They weathered not only the storms of centuries, but the more destructive forces of human prejudice and willful ignorance. Some mounds were destroyed by farming and development. There, ancient earth scattered to build roads and fill foundations. Others were damaged by treasure hunters seeking artifacts to support their theories about lost civilizations. But the mounds endured, and gradually, patient scholarship began to reveal their true story. Modern archaeology, with its sophisticated techniques and respectful approach to Native American heritage, has painted a picture of Cahokia that is far more remarkable than any myth. The real story of this great city, built by the ancestors of Native American peoples, is a testament to human creativity, social organization, and spiritual vision that needs no embellishment or false attribution. The denial of Cahokia's true origins represents one of the great tragedies of American historical consciousness. For generations, the achievements of Native American peoples were systematically erased from the national narrative, replaced by fantasies that served to justify conquest and displacement. The cost of this denial was not only to Native American communities, whose heritage was stolen and distorted, but to all Americans, who were deprived of a fuller understanding of their continent's rich history. As we contemplate the great mounds rising from the Illinois prairie, we can see them not only as monuments to a remarkable civilization, but as reminders of the importance of truth over comfortable mythology. They stand as silent accusations against the prejudices that blinded so many for so long, and as testimonies to the resilience of historical truth, which eventually emerges no matter how deeply it is buried. The story of Cahokia's denial should humble us and remind us to question our own assumptions about the past. It should make us more careful about the narratives we construct and the evidence we choose to ignore. Most importantly, it should inspire us to listen more carefully to the voices of those whose stories have been marginalized or forgotten. In the gentle light of dawn, as the mist rises from the Mississippi River and the great earthen pyramids emerge from shadow, we can almost hear the whispers of those who built this remarkable city. Their voices, silenced for so long by prejudice and myth, are finally being heard again. The truth of Cahokia, like the ancient mounds themselves, has proven more enduring than the lies told about it. And so the great city begins to reclaim its rightful place in the story of human achievement, no longer hidden behind the veil of false mythology, but standing proudly as a testament to the creativity, intelligence, and spiritual vision of the Native American peoples who built it. The mounds have waited patiently through centuries of denial, and now they can finally tell their true story to those willing to listen. The morning light filters through the visitor center windows at Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, casting golden rays across interpretive displays that tell a story 7 centuries in the making. Outside, the great earthen pyramids stand patient and eternal, their ancient surfaces now protected by wooden steps and viewing platforms that allow modern pilgrims to climb toward the sky as countless others have done before them. This is Cahokia today, not lost, not forgotten, but finally beginning to reclaim its rightful place in the story of human achievement. In 1982, the international community recognized what Native Americans had always known. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization designated Cahokia Mounds as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, placing it alongside the Pyramids of Egypt, the Great Wall of China, and other monuments to human creativity and vision. This recognition was not merely ceremonial. It was an acknowledgement that the great city of Cahokia represents something fundamental about our species' capacity for innovation, cooperation, and spiritual expression. Walking through the site today, visitors encounter a landscape that has been carefully preserved and respectfully interpreted. The central section of what was once a 4,000-acre city is now protected as a state historic site, ensuring that future generations will be able to experience the wonder of standing atop Monk's Mound and gazing out over the Mississippi River Valley, where this remarkable civilization once flourished. The modern visitor center, built with sensitivity to the sacred nature of the site, houses artifacts that speak across the centuries. Here you can see the pottery vessels that once held the corn, beans, and squash that sustained the city. Here are the copper ornaments that adorned the elite, the shell beads that traveled thousands of miles through ancient trade networks, and the stone tools that shaped wood and earth into monuments that have endured for 1,000 years. But perhaps the most important development at Cahokia today is the growing collaboration between archaeologists and Native American communities. Modern tribes recognize the site as being important to their heritage, with the Osage Nation serving as a primary collaborator with archaeologists and site management. This partnership represents a healing of the historical wound inflicted by centuries of denial and misappropriation. The descendants of the Mississippian people are finally being recognized as the rightful inheritors of Cahokia's legacy. The collaborative approach to understanding Cahokia has enriched our knowledge immeasurably. Native American perspectives on the spiritual significance of the mounds, the astronomical alignments, and the ceremonial practices have provided insights that pure archaeological investigation alone could never have achieved. Traditional ecological knowledge has helped researchers understand how the Mississippian people managed their environment, practiced sustainable agriculture, and maintained the delicate balance between human needs and natural resources. Modern archaeological techniques have revealed details about Cahokian life that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. Researchers have extracted core samples from nearby Horseshoe Lake, analyzing fecal stannos to track population changes. Over time, this innovative approach has provided new evidence about the city's rise and decline, painting a more nuanced picture of how this urban experiment unfolded. Advanced imaging technologies have allowed archaeologists to map the entire Cahokian landscape without disturbing the sacred earth. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed the locations of ancient buildings, storage pits, and burial sites. Aerial photography and LiDAR scanning have identified previously unknown mounds and revealed the sophisticated urban planning that organized this vast metropolitan area. The picture that emerges from this modern research is of a city far more complex and sophisticated than earlier scholars had imagined. We now know that Cahokia was not simply a large village, but a true urban center with specialized districts, complex governance systems, and a level of social organization that rivals any ancient city anywhere in the world. The engineering knowledge required to build Monk's Mound, the astronomical precision of the solar calendars, and the artistic sophistication of Cahokian craftspeople all testify to a level of achievement that demands our deepest respect. But Cahokia's lessons extend beyond archaeology and anthropology. In our modern world, facing our own environmental challenges and questions about sustainable development, the Mississippian experience offers both inspiration and warning. The story of Cahokia shows us that human societies can achieve remarkable things when they work in harmony with their environment and with each other. The sophisticated agricultural systems, the sustainable resource management, and the spiritual practices that connected the people to their land all offer models for our own relationship with the natural world. At the same time, Cahokia's eventual abandonment reminds us that even the most impressive human achievements are vulnerable to environmental change and social disruption. The climatic shifts that challenged Mississippian agriculture, the resource depletion that may have contributed to the city's decline, and the social tensions that may have torn the community apart all echo contemporary concerns about climate change, environmental degradation, and social inequality. The site today serves as a classroom where these lessons can be learned and contemplated. School groups from across the region visit Cahokia to learn about Native American history and archaeology. Since becoming a World Heritage Site, the site has welcomed over 10 million visitors, each carrying away their own understanding of what this remarkable place represents. The interpretive programs at Cahokia emphasize not just the achievements of the Mississippian people, but their enduring legacy. The agricultural techniques they developed, the artistic traditions they established, and the spiritual practices they maintained all continued to influence Native American cultures long after the great city was abandoned. The corn that sustained Cahokia became the foundation of countless other Native American societies. The mound-building tradition spread throughout the eastern United States. The astronomical knowledge and seasonal ceremonies developed at Cahokia informed religious practices that persisted for centuries. Perhaps most importantly, the site serves as a place of healing and reconciliation. For too long, the achievements of Native American peoples were denied or attributed to others. The recognition of Cahokia as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the collaborative research programs, and the respectful interpretation of the site all represent a growing acknowledgement of the true history of this continent. Native American visitors often speak of the emotional power of standing atop Monk's Mound, of feeling connected to ancestors whose achievements are finally being recognized and celebrated. The preservation of Cahokia also represents a broader commitment to protecting and honoring Indigenous heritage. The site serves as a model for how archaeological research can be conducted respectfully, in partnership with descendant communities, and with full acknowledgement of the cultural and spiritual significance of ancient places. This approach is being adopted at other Native American sites across the continent, healing old wounds and creating new opportunities for understanding and appreciation. The lessons of Cahokia extend beyond the Americas. As one of the world's great urban experiments, Cahokia offers insights into the universal human experience of city building, environmental adaptation, and social organization. The challenges faced by the Mississippian people: population growth, resource management, climate change, social inequality, are challenges that face human societies everywhere. The solutions they developed, as well as the difficulties they ultimately could not overcome, offer valuable perspectives for our own struggles with these enduring problems. Standing today on the great plaza where thousands once gathered for ceremonies that connected earth to sky, visitors can feel the continuity of human aspiration that links us to our ancestors. The same sun that shone on Mississippian priests conducting solstice ceremonies still rises over Monk's Mound each morning. The same Mississippi River that brought trade goods and cultural influences to ancient Cahokia continues to flow past the Yunque site, carrying with it the memory of all who have lived along its banks. The earthen pyramids themselves have become symbols of endurance and hope. Built entirely by human hands, shaped from the soil of the Mississippi Valley, they represent the power of human cooperation and vision. They remind us that great achievements are possible when people work together with shared purpose and respect for the land that sustains them. They stand as monuments not just to the past, but to the potential for human greatness in any age. As modern visitors walk the paths between the mounds, they participate in a pilgrimage that has been ongoing for over 1,000 years. The sacred geography of Cahokia continues to draw seekers, students, and dreamers who come to experience the power of this ancient place. Some come for the archaeology, some for the history, and some simply for the profound peace that settles over the soul. When standing in the presence of such enduring achievement, the story of Cahokia is ultimately the story of human potential. It reminds us that our ancestors were capable of remarkable things, that innovation and creativity are not products of modernity, but enduring characteristics of our species. It teaches us that the earth itself is a repository of memory, that the soil beneath our feet holds stories of triumph and tragedy, wisdom and wonder. In the gentle twilight that settles over the Illinois prairie when the last visitors have departed, and the mounds stand silent under the stars, Cahokia continues its ancient vigil. The great earthen pyramids, shaped by human hands but returned to the embrace of nature, serve as bridges between past and future, between earth and sky, between the dreams of those who built them and the aspirations of those who visit them today. Lessons of Cahokia are not just archaeological or historical, but deeply personal. They remind us that we are part of a continuous human story, that our own struggles and achievements are connected to those of people who lived centuries ago in this same landscape. They teach us that the earth remembers, that our actions have consequences that echo through time, and that the greatest monuments to human achievement are not built of stone, but of the stories we tell and the memories we preserve. As we prepare for sleep, let us carry with us the wisdom of Cahokia. Let us remember that we are heirs to a remarkable legacy of human creativity and resilience. Let us honor the memory of those who built something beautiful and enduring from the earth beneath their feet. And let us dream of what we might build, together, with respect for the land that sustains us and reverence for the ancestors who showed us what is possible. The prairie wind carries stories tonight, whispering across the ancient mounds as darkness settles over the Mississippi Valley. In the gentle embrace of twilight, when the last visitors have departed and the interpretive signs fade into shadow, Cahokia awakens to its most sacred time. This is the hour when the earth remembers, when the boundaries between past and present grow thin, and when the great earthen pyramids reveal their deepest truths to those who know how to listen. Standing here in the gathering darkness, we can feel the presence of something profound and eternal. The mounds rise around us like sleeping giants, their surfaces softened by 1,000 years of wind and rain, their stories buried beneath layers of prairie grass and accumulated soil. Yet they are not silent. They pulse with the memory of human hands that shaped them, human voices that blessed them, human dreams that lifted them toward the sky. Each mound is a prayer made manifest in earth and stone. The mounds themselves symbolize cosmic order, with Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the Americas, likely serving as a focal point for rituals and ceremonies. These are not merely impressive monuments to human engineering. They are sacred spaces where the physical and spiritual worlds meet, where the ancestors reached toward the divine and found that the divine was reaching back. The spiritual significance of Cahokia extends far beyond what archaeology alone can tell us. Recent research suggests that upwards of 20% of Cahokia's neighborhood structures did not serve domestic functions, but were rather intended to facilitate engagement with non-human spiritual beings as part of an animistic religion. This was a city built not just for human habitation, but for communion with the sacred, a place where the visible and invisible worlds intersected in daily life. Imagine, if you will, the spiritual landscape of ancient Cahokia. The great plaza stretches before us, once filled with thousands of people gathered for ceremonies that connected earth to sky. The smoke from sacred fires rises in the still air, carrying prayers and offerings to the realm of the spirits. The rhythm of drums echoes across the water, synchronizing human heartbeats with the pulse of the cosmos. Large earthen mounds served religious purposes in elevating the chiefs above the common people and closer to the sun, which they worshiped. The builders of Cahokia understood something that we in our modern age are only beginning to remember: that the earth itself is alive, that the soil beneath our feet holds memory, and that the act of building can be an act of worship. Every basket of earth carried to create these mounds was a prayer. Every stone placed with intention was a word in a conversation with the sacred. The mounds were not built merely to impress or intimidate. They were built to bridge the gap between the human and the divine dot. As we contemplate the mystery of Cahokia, we begin to understand that its true significance lies not in what it was, but in what it represents. This great city stands as proof that human beings, in every age and culture, are driven by something more than mere survival. We are spiritual beings, seekers of meaning, builders of beauty, dreamers of impossible dreams. The people of Cahokia, working with nothing but their hands and their vision, created something that continues to inspire wonder 1,000 years later. The earth remembers everything. It remembers the footsteps of children playing in the shadow of the great mounds. It remembers the voices of women grinding corn for the morning meal. It remembers the chants of priests welcoming the dawn from the summit of Monk's Mound. It remembers the tears of those who mourned their dead and the laughter of those who celebrated new life. All of these memories are held in the soil, waiting for those who know how to listen. The wind that blows across the prairie tonight carries the same elements that once filled the lungs of Cahokian builders. The stars that shine above us now are the same stars that guided their astronomers in calculating the precise alignments of their solar calendars. The Mississippi River that flows past the mounds has carried the dreams and sorrows of countless generations to the sea. We are not separate from this ancient world. We are part of its continuing story. The lessons of Cahokia speak to the deepest parts of our souls. They remind us that we are temporary custodians of an earth that is both fragile and enduring. They teach us that our individual lives find meaning only in connection with something larger than ourselves. They show us that true monuments are not built of stone, but of the love and devotion we pour into our work, our relationships, and our communities. In the quiet of this prairie night, we can almost hear the whispers of the ancestors. They speak to us across the centuries, not in words, but in the language of the heart. They tell us that the earth is sacred, that community is essential, that the spiritual dimension of life is not optional, but fundamental to human flourishing. They remind us that we are all mound builders, all engaged in the sacred work of creating something beautiful and meaningful from the raw materials of existence. The great earthen pyramids of Cahokia stand as eternal symbols of human aspiration. They represent our species' refusal to accept the limitations of the merely material world. They embody our need to reach toward something higher, to create something that will outlast our brief individual existence, to participate in the ongoing creation of meaning and beauty in the universe. As we prepare to enter the realm of dreams, let us carry with us the wisdom of Cahokia. Let us remember that we are part of a story that began long before our birth and will continue long after our death. Let us honor the earth that sustains us, the communities that support us, and the ancestors who prepared the way for us. Let us be worthy inheritors of their legacy of creativity, spirituality, and hope. The mounds of Cahokia are more than monuments to the past. They are promises to the future. They promise that human beings, working together with shared vision and dedication, can create wonders that endure. They promise that the earth will remember our best efforts and our deepest love. They promise that the spiritual dimension of human existence will never be entirely lost, no matter how secular our age may become. In the gentle darkness that envelops us now, the mounds seem to breathe with the rhythm of the earth itself. They remind us that we are not alone in the universe, that we are part of a vast web of connection that links all living things. They whisper to us of the importance of patience, of working slowly and steadily toward goals that may not be achieved in our lifetime. They teach us that the most important work is often the work that is never finished, the work that each generation must take up anew. The spirits of Cahokia are not confined to the past. They live in every act of creation, every moment of reverence, every effort to build something beautiful and lasting. They live in the archaeologists who patiently uncover their story in the Native American communities who keep their memory alive, in the visitors who climb the mounds and feel the weight of history and the lightness of hope as sleep approaches. Let us imagine ourselves joining the long procession of pilgrims who have walked these sacred grounds. Let us add our footsteps to the countless others who have climbed toward the sky, seeking connection with something greater than themselves. Let us offer our own prayers to the earth and sky, our own gratitude for the privilege of being alive. In this remarkable world, the earthen pyramids of Cahokia will outlast us all. They will stand through storms and seasons, through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the changing of the very climate itself. They will continue to whisper their ancient wisdom to any who have ears to hear. They will remind future generations that their ancestors were capable of remarkable things, that the human spirit is indomitable, and that the earth itself is a sacred trust. In the end, the story of Cahokia is not about the past, but about the eternal present in which all human action takes place. It is about the moment when earth becomes art, when community becomes sacred, when the mundane work of daily life becomes a form of prayer. It is about the recognition that we are all temporary inhabitants of an earth that is both our home and our teacher, our sustenance and our inspiration. As we drift toward sleep, let us carry with us the peace of the prairie night and the wisdom of the ancient mounds. Let us dream of the great city that once flourished here, of the people who built it with their hands and their hearts, of the spiritual vision that continues to inspire and challenge us. Let us dream of our own capacity to create beauty, to build community, to reach toward the sacred in our daily lives. The mounds of Cahokia stand patient and eternal under the stars, keeping their ancient vigil over the Mississippi Valley. They have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the changing of the seasons, the endless cycle of growth and decay and renewal that characterizes all life on earth. They will continue to stand long after we are gone, carrying forward the dreams and aspirations of all who have loved this place, in the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass, in the soft lapping of river water against the shore, in the gentle sighs of the earth settling into sleep. We can hear the eternal song of Cahokia. It is a song of hope and memory, of loss and renewal, of the human spirit's endless capacity to create meaning from the raw materials of existence. It is a song that will continue as long as the earth endures, as long as human beings seek connection with something greater than themselves, as long as the ancient mounds stand as bridges between earth and sky. Sleep now and dream of Cahokia. Dream of the great city that was, the wisdom that endures, and the possibilities that await. Dream of the sacred earth beneath your feet and the infinite sky above your head. Dream of the ancestors who built wonders from nothing but earth and vision. And dream of the wonders you might build in your own life with nothing but love and dedication. The mounds keep their eternal watch, and in their silence they speak the deepest truths of human existence. We are all mound builders. We are all reaching toward the sky. We are all part of the great story that began with the first human hand shaped by earth and will continue until the last human heart beats in rhythm with the cosmos. Rest now in the peace of Cahokia, where earth and sky meet in eternal embrace, where the whispers of the ancestors become the dreams of the future, and where the sacred and the everyday dance together in the endless celebration of life itself.